Hello, everyone. It's Stephen Bedard, and I want to ask the question, are women allowed to be pastors? Well, I'm going to put my cards out on the table and say that I am the co-pastor of the congregation that I'm at, and I'm co-pastor with my wife. We both preach and we both have equal authority. So I'm just letting you know right now where I'm coming from. I don't want a bait and switch or anything like that. Now, of course, people are going to respond and say, well, wait a minute. It doesn't really matter, Steve, what you think about women in ministry. What matters is, what does the Bible say? That's what we have to focus on. And that's actually what I wanted to look at here. It's not just that, well, you know, I think it's kind of fun to pastor with my wife. Therefore, women are allowed to be pastors. We need a little bit more than that. And so one of the things that you'll often hear in these discussions is that the Bible clearly says that women are not allowed to be pastors. And I always get nervous anytime anyone says the Bible clearly says. Because what people usually mean when they say the Bible clearly says is that they feel very strongly about their particular interpretation. That's what they really mean by the Bible clearly says. But anyways, it's not as if the Bible doesn't talk about aspects of the role of men and women and ministry and all those kind of things. So we do need to look at that. And really, the most often passage that's quoted is from 1 Timothy chapter 2, verses 11 and 12. And in the NIV, this is what it says. A woman should learn in quietness and full submission. I do not permit a woman to teach or to have authority over a man. She must be silent. And to that, for many people, that's enough. You don't need anything else. Just those two verses makes it completely clear that women are not allowed to be pastors. There's a couple things that I would love to say about this. First of all, it's not absolutely clear here, because what's interesting is that it's not even agreed on how to interpret or how to translate that verse. For example, in the Common English Bible, this is how those two verses are translated. A wife should learn quietly with complete submission. I don't allow a wife to teach or to control her husband. Instead, she should be a quiet listener. So for the Common English Bible, and for some Bible scholars, they do see this verse as being not about the role of women in the church, but rather the relationship between a husband and wife. Because in Greek, the word for man and husband are the same, and the word for woman and wife are the same. So when we translate it, we have to make a choice. Now, of course, that just opens up a whole nother can of worms if we do this as husband and wife, and I'm not going to get into that in this video. And I'm not necessarily arguing that it's specifically about that. I just want to make it clear that the Bible isn't completely clear. At least our understanding of the Bible isn't completely clear when we don't know how to translate that. But even going with the NIV, so it says, I do not permit a woman to teach or have authority over a man. And people would say, well, we need to take that completely literally. Never, ever can a woman ever have any kind of authority over a man. In fact, some Christians will go far enough as to say it's not just even within the church, but in no circumstance within life should a woman ever have authority over a man. And so do with that as you might. But the next part of what Paul says there is she must be silent. Now, most churches who take the first part of the verse literally don't necessarily take that part of it literally. They don't require all women to be silent in church. Of course, this brings us to another passage that is often brought up, and this is from 1 Corinthians 14 in verses 33 and 34. As in all the congregations of the saints, women should remain silent in the churches. They are not allowed to speak, but must be in submission, as the law says. And this is a challenging verse for everyone involved, because if Paul says they must be silent, meaning that they can't say anything in the church service, then why is it earlier in 1 Corinthians Paul gives guidelines for how women are to prophesy within a worship service? Interesting. That makes it should make us think that maybe the Bible isn't so clear on whether women should be silent or speaking or so on. We really have to wrestle with that. There seems to be more going on, and I would suspect that what's being talked about here is that because this passage is talking about the order that should be prevalent in a worship service. And it seems like Paul is arguing more about women who are asking their husbands, what does that mean? What's going on there? And they're asking a lot of questions. They should just not be asking those questions at that time. This is something that should happen after the worship service. They can ask their husbands at that point. Because you remember, women do not have a lot of educational opportunities at this time. And so it would be very difficult. So what do we do with all of these things? There's also the passages in 1 Timothy that talk about the role of overseers and deacons. And it says you must be the husband of one wife. And for some people, that's slam dunk. Husband of one wife, only men can be pastors. Except for the fact that it doesn't seem like in the ancient world that they were all that worried about being gender inclusive in things. So there's a lot of times it will talk about the brothers, even though it's obvious that they're not just talking about the male Christians. They're talking about the brothers and sisters, and a lot of the more modern Bibles will add "and sisters," so that it's clear that even though the Greek word there might be just for the brothers, it's actually talking about the brothers and sisters. But most often they're not worried about that. And the assumption, I'm sure, is that most of the leadership positions probably were by men, because that was a part of the culture. That's just the way things were. And so if Paul in 1 Timothy wanted to make it clear that those particular roles of deacons and overseers had to be only men, he could have done it in a different way than just saying that they were the husband of only one wife. But here's where the crux of the argument is. For some people, they take the 1 Timothy passage and say, that is the foundation. Everything else has to be interpreted through that lens. And anything else we find that might seem to contradict that, well, we'll just have to say that it's wrong, because this is the most important verse of the entire New Testament when it comes to the role of ministry. By the way, I need to even clarify, when we're talking about women as pastors, we use that term pastor. That's a very Protestant way, often evangelical way of talking about a certain role. I grew up Anglican, and we never referred to our minister as a pastor. We always referred to him as a minister or as a priest, as a reverend, something like that. We never used the term pastor. And actually, pastor is only found once in the New Testament, and that's in Ephesians. And we don't get a whole lot of a job description there for pastor. In fact, the role that we call a pastor, so a paid person on staff who's gone to seminary, who doesn't have another job, whose full-time is to pastor a church, there's not really a whole lot I'll say there's nothing in the New Testament about that. And so when we say that women are excluded from that role is not even imagined in the New Testament. Now, don't tell my church this, because I actually get my paycheck from being a paid pastor and a seminary graduate. So we're just going to keep that between me and you. But we just have to be aware that that role of when we talk about women as pastors, I don't even know that pastors is the best way for us to talk about it. Now, we can talk about, are women allowed to have a position of leadership or teaching? That would be helpful for us. And those would be the roles that we might think of as pastoral roles, equivalent to what we have for today. So, are women allowed to be have teaching roles or leadership roles or anything else like that? Well, 1 Timothy chapter 2 says no, they can't. So therefore, end of story, we can just end this video and we're all done. Except for the fact that we have examples in the New Testament of women who teach, and who are not just teaching other women or aren't just teaching children, but are teaching men, and who have positions of leadership. So the most obvious example is the example of Priscilla and Aquila in Acts chapter 14, where it's very interesting because we see that Paul encounters them. And first of all, he refers to them as Aquila and Priscilla because it seems as if he meets Aquila first and then meets his wife through Aquila. But afterwards, when we see the role of what they're doing, it's always Priscilla and Aquila. The woman comes first, as if she was the most prominent of the two. And what are we told about their role? Well, we're told that they pull aside Apollos, who ends up later on becoming one of the most prominent leaders in the early church, and say, hey, you're doing a good job, but you don't have full teaching when it comes to Jesus. Let us teach you. And it's Priscilla and Aquila, again, Priscilla first, who pull aside Apollos. And there's no sense in there that Aquila is the one doing the teaching of Apollos and Priscilla is playing the piano in the background or is babysitting Apollos' kids while this is happening or having tea with his wife. There's nothing like that. It seems as if probably Priscilla was very active in the teaching of Apollos. When we turn to Romans chapter 16, which is one of the richest chapters to understand the role of women, you probably just passed by Romans 16 because it's a greetings passage chapter where it just says, "Hey, say hi to so and so and so and so," and on, and it seems pretty boring, but there's a lot of stuff here. In chapter 16, verse 1, I commend to you our sister Phoebe, a servant of the church. And she is the one who brings Romans, the letter, to Rome. And she was probably the one who was reading it to them. And if they had questions about what Paul meant there, she was probably authorized by Paul to answer some of those questions. And then we also see in verse 3, greet Priscilla and Aquila, my fellow workers in Christ Jesus. That, again, Priscilla is not just doing something in the background, she is working. And Priscilla is given the name first, again, just to put emphasis on there. And there's all kinds of lists of different people who are mentioned in here. Mary is mentioned in verse 6. There's other women that are mentioned in here. And one of the most important here is verse 7, which says, greet Andronicus and Junia. Now, in my NIV here, it has Junius, which is the masculine version of the name. Now, there's no evidence that that name ever was used as Junius. And other than really NIV, I'm not sure, maybe there are a few other translations, but most translations will put it as Junia because that seems to be what it's saying. So it's referring to them. Why would they retranslate that into a male name? Because those are my relatives who have been in prison with me. They are outstanding among the apostles. Well, you can't have Junia as an apostle because she's a woman, because we've already decided women can't be in ministry. They can't be leaders. They can't have authority. And apostles have authority, and they would be involved in teaching. So either she's not a woman or she's not an apostle. That is how numerous translations try to deal with this problem. But when it is translated as clearly as possible, using the most common sense ways of translating those Greek words, it seems as if it's saying Junia is an apostle. And you would only translate it in a different way if you were starting with the assumption that there's no way that a woman could be an apostle. So that is a big part of what's going on. So what you have to deal with, and this is really where my journey was, because at first I started with the verses. I started with 1 Timothy chapter 2. And if 1 Timothy chapter 2 says women are not allowed to have authority, then women are not allowed to have authority. If they're not allowed to have authority, then they can't be pastors, they can't be leaders, they can't teach, and so on. But then I read the New Testament, and we see that there are women actively involved in ministry, in leadership, in teaching, and we have to weigh those things. Either we say we already know that it's wrong, and therefore the examples of those things are just, we're misunderstanding what's going on because there's no way it could happen because they should have known 1 Timothy 2. Or else we look at those things and say, well, this is what's happening. This picture, this snapshot of the early church has women actively involved in ministry. And again, we can't say, well, but they're not pastors the way we would think of pastors today. But even the men weren't pastors in the way we think of pastors today. We have to be so careful with that. We just have to ask, were there women who had positions of leadership and authority and of teaching in the early church? And it seems as if that's indeed the case. Were most of them the leaders men? Yes, absolutely. It was a patriarchal society. It was a society in which men had more rights. They definitely had more educational opportunities. They were the ones who would work outside of the home. And so there was a lot of limitations within the culture there. But considering those things, it becomes even more amazing that we have women in the early church in such roles. And so, can women be pastors? Well, women are pastors. Whether you like it or not, women are pastors. There are women who are gifted with pastoral gifts, gifted as preachers, teachers, caregivers, leaders, vision casters, all of these things. And the scriptures seem to back it up. What is happening with women pastors today is not a brand new innovation. Rather, it is something that continues on from what we see in the New Testament. You might not like it, and to be honest, I struggled with it for a number of years in the past, but I am convinced that the biblical position is that ministry is for all, and the role that we consider pastors for today, that is open to all those who are called, whether men or women. Thank you for watching the video. I would love to hear your comments. And please visit me at my website, stephenjbedard.com, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you, and God bless.